Welcome to This Explainer. I am absolutely thrilled you're joining us today. We're about to take a massive 360-degree journey to look at our closest celestial neighbor, the moon. And we're going to cover the whole shebang. We'll start by zooming all the way in on how the moon has shaped human culture and our personal myths. Then we'll transition out to the literal physical mechanics of how it actually moves in our sky. And finally, we are going to land squarely on the highly strategic $30 billion geopolitical space race that is unfolding right above our heads today. It is a huge topic, but we're going to break it down step by step. Okay, let's just dive right into our roadmap. We've got 4 stops today. 1, symbols and stories. 2, upcoming eclipses to watch. 3, NASA's new moon plan. And 4, the strategic lunar race. So let's kick things off with section 1, symbols and stories. For literally thousands of years, the moon hasn't just been a rock floating in the sky, right? It's acted as this incredibly powerful mirror for human longing. It reflects themes of mystery, change, and emotional depth across pretty much every culture on Earth. To really get a sense of this, just look at how different traditions interpret its phases. Like, notice how the new moon represents this tiny seed of possibility. It's a quiet, anticipatory time that people often use for planting intentions. But then, contrast that with the full moon. The full moon brings intense clarity and culmination. It's illuminated, highly intuitive, and, let's be honest, sometimes a little chaotic. This continuous cycle, from quiet potential to intense realization, is exactly why the moon is such a timeless storytelling device. And hey, speaking of storytelling, artists have done an amazing job capturing this lunar mythology over the years. A really perfect modern example of this is Enrico Casarosa's 2011 animated short film for Pixar called La Luna. The whole story literally takes place on the surface of the moon, where 3 generations of an Italian family have this incredibly unique job, sweeping up fallen stars. But as you watch it, you realize it's not really just about space janitors, it's a story about generational conflict. You have the grandfather, Nono, who firmly insists on using a traditional besom broom, while the father, Papa, stubbornly pushes for standard push broom. And caught right between these two bickering older men is the young boy, Bambino. When this absolutely massive star crashes onto the lunar surface, way too big for the adults to move with their brooms, Bambino steps up. He breaks it apart with a hammer. And then, in this great moment, he turns his cap backward, proving he is his own person, and chooses a rake to sweep up the pieces. He's totally charting his own unique path. He manages to honor his family's traditions while quite literally changing the phase of the moon through his own ingenuity. It's brilliant. Moving right along, that brings us to section 2, upcoming eclipses to watch. Okay, so we're zooming out from artistic symbolism to the literal physical mechanics of the moon interacting with our Earth. Because while stories are wonderful, the actual real-life physics of the moon create some of the most breathtaking visual spectacles we can possibly experience. But before you look up, you really need to know exactly what you're looking at, and more importantly, how to do it safely. The mechanics dictate the experience here. A solar eclipse happens when the moon passes directly between the sun and the Earth. This only happens during a new moon phase, and because you're essentially looking right at the sun, you absolutely must use approved eclipse classes to protect your eyes. No exceptions. On the flip side, a lunar eclipse happens when the Earth passes between the sun and the moon, which casts a shadow onto the lunar surface. Now, this happens during a full moon, and it is completely safe to watch with the naked eye. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the upcoming astronomical calendar. Mark your calendars for August 12th, 2026, because that brings a total solar eclipse. This is a huge deal, as it's the very first total solar eclipse anywhere on Earth since the one in April 2024. The path of totality is going to sweep across Greenland, Iceland, Russia, and Spain, though parts of North America will get a partial view. But hey, if you miss that one, don't sweat it. Just a couple of weeks later, on August 27th and 28th, a partial lunar eclipse will be visible across almost all of North America. But you know, humanity isn't really content just watching eclipses from our backyards anymore. We are actively, aggressively pushing to return to the lunar surface itself. The Space Launch System, or SLS, represents this monumental mechanical leap. It entirely bridges the gap between just observing space from Earth and engaging in active, modern spaceflight. This right here is the vehicle driving our next era of exploration. Which leads us perfectly into Section 3, NASA's new moon plan. So the Artemis program, which is designed to return humans to the moon, has just undergone a massive, highly consequential restructuring. NASA is actively redesigning its roadmap to mitigate risks, deal with some inevitable delays, and drastically increase how often they can actually launch. Here is how that revised sequence breaks down. Originally, Artemis 3 was supposed to be the big crewed landing, but NASA realized that attempting deep space operations, lunar rendezvous, and surface landings all on a single mission, well, it was simply stacking way too many firsts together. Actually, scratch that. It was just unacceptably risky. So, step one is now adapting Artemis 3 in 2027 to be a low Earth orbit docking demonstration, testing all those complex interfaces much closer to home. Step 2 then pushes the actual first crewed landing to Artemis 4 in 2028. And Step 3 focuses entirely on standardizing the SLS rocket to finally establish a reliable annual launch cadence. They're essentially going back to a much safer, Apollo-style incremental test philosophy. And that brings us to our fourth and final section, the strategic lunar race. So, you might be wondering, why the sudden urgency to restructure and streamline everything? Well, the geopolitical environment has completely changed. It's no longer just about the spirit of exploration. It's about shifting global realities and establishing a permanent foothold before rival nations beat us to it. So the crucial point here is this number, $30 billion. This is NASA's massive 7-year budget plan, which was unveiled as part of a major strategic pivot. NASA is effectively abandoning its previous centerpiece, an orbital space station called the Lunar Gateway, and they're redirecting all those resources directly toward building a permanent surface base, because they recognize that at the end of the day, an orbital station doesn't put boots on the moon. The new absolute goal is direct-to-surface infrastructure. And honestly, this shifts the entire paradigm of how we even measure success in space. Just contrast the iconic, beautiful Apollo-era perspective of a first arrival with the gritty future of sustained lunar operations. As analysis from the Center for Strategic and International Studies makes very clear, against a competitor like China, simply showing up first is no longer the decisive metric. A lunar return that you can't repeat offers very, very limited geopolitical value. Success in today's space race is defined by sustained access, permanent surface infrastructure, and reliable everyday logistics. Which leaves us with one final, incredibly provocative question. Can the United States actually translate its planned first landing into a durable, ongoing presence? Or will China, with its own massive lunar ambitions, secure the long-term strategic advantage? We have journeyed all the way from ancient symbolic myths and children sweeping stars in a Pixar short, straight through the orbital mechanics of eclipses, right up to the absolute highest stakes of global geopolitics. The moon is no longer just a mirror for our imagination, guys. It is literally the next frontier of human infrastructure. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer today. Keep looking up, and I'll see you next time.